Congressman, Dr., Presidential Candidate and Champion of Freedom, Ron Paul.
Ron Paul!
Thank you for that nice introduction. Thank you for this very nice welcome. I'm delighted to be here today. In the home of free speech. I can say anything I want tonight, right? As long as it's true and good news, right? Before I get started, I want to make sure you see my wife up here. My wife Carol is with me. We have one of our 18 grandchildren with us, Linda, who's a college student. But it is wonderful to see such a nice crowd come out and talk and come to hear a politician speak. But I hope I'm different than the other politicians. That's what I'm hoping. Because I want to tell you what's going on in this country and what we ought to do about it, because we have a few problems, and young people have a problem because you're inheriting a mess, and there's something that we can do about it, and it's not all that difficult. I am convinced that we've gotten into the mess in this country basically because we have sent too many people to Washington that either can't read or didn't understand the Constitution. And we want to make sure that we send nobody to Washington unless they know, unless they can read and understand it. But we also have to believe them when they put their hand up and take an oath to obey the Constitution. I tell you what, if we'd had that for the last 40 or 50 years, our government would be very much smaller. For instance, take the conditions of war. We haven't had a declared war since World War II. We were attacked, we declared war, fought Germans, fought the Japanese, and it was a major ordeal in about less than 4 years. How long have we been in Afghanistan? Way too long. But we've been going to war without declaration. We were in Korea and Vietnam and dozens of other places. Today, you might have read the news. We just put some troops in Australia. I don't know what we're doing. We don't need to have more troops spread around the world. We're already in 150 countries. We have 900 bases. I think if we have a military, which we should have, we should defend this country. We shouldn't be the policemen of the world. And we shouldn't be involved in nation buildings. Other nations might not want to live like we do, and they have a right and a privilege and a moral authority to do what they want, even when they make mistakes, because we do not have the facilities, the moral authority, nor the constitutional authority to go around the world and tell other people what they must do and how to run their country.
Restore sovereignty!
We have a job on ourselves enough just trying to straighten out our own government, let alone trying to straighten out the governments around the world. So, but people argued the case, and they've argued this for many years. It's been going on since Woodrow Wilson. That is, America is an exceptional nation, and we have been. We have been a great nation, the freest nation ever, and the most prosperous, which we no longer are. But they said that we have exceptional values, and they're so exceptional and so wonderful that we have this obligation to spread our message around the world by force. That makes no sense. If we are an exceptional nation, and if we have those exceptional values, you cancel them all out when you decide on the principle of preemptive war. We have been following the position of preemptive war in the past 10 years. If we were more honest with ourselves, we'd call it aggression, and we don't believe in preemptive war, and we only fight defensive wars. These wars have been going on in the last 10 years. We have added $4 trillion to our national debt. and a lot of that is falling on your shoulders because this is a burden. We are in the midst of an economic crisis. It's a debt crisis, and guess what they've been doing for the last 5 years since they recognized there's a crisis? They made the misdiagnosis. They didn't know it was a debt crisis. They thought they needed more spending, and they're running up the debt even faster, and they think that's going to solve the problem. It will not. We need to shrink the size of government. We need to give the money and the authorities and the power back to the people and let them spend their own money. But this has been going on now for more than 50 years, and it's been very, very tragic for us. If you think of all the money and all the lives lost and all the injuries and penalties since World War II, because no war has been declared since World War II, I mean, it could add up into trillions and trillions of dollars. Just think how much richer this country would be if we just take this simple position that only fight defensive war and don't go to war unless the people see to it that it's declared and the Congress declares the war, not allow the presidents to go to war on their own. This was an important issue for the founders, and this is why they put it into the Constitution that the executive branch could not go to war without a declaration. They figured this would be important, but you know, not too long ago, the Secretary of Defense, Panetta, was before a committee, and they were asking him where he gets his authority because he was planning another war. We've been involved in Egypt and Libya, and now we're getting ready, and we're already involved in Syria. They said, where do you get this authority? He says, well, from the United Nations.
Restore sovereignty!
If anybody can discover which part of the Constitution that's in, let me know what it is, because it's not true. It's not true. They do not have this authority, and the United Nations can't make those decisions, and we shouldn't allow them. Matter of fact, the United Nations and the NATO charters explicitly say that this does not mean that you go to war without it going back to the U.S. Congress and the Congress making a decision. But nevertheless, they just go and they do these things, believing that it will be ignored, and it has been ignored for a long time. So much of what we have been doing, the spending, the money, and the running up of the debt, the violations of civil liberties, and the involvement overseas, it's been ignored because we have been a super wealthy country. And all we have done, and so often, is we have way too much compromising in Washington. We have compromising between the right and the left, and the conservatives and liberals, and they come together and they agree to keep spending more money. I'll spend money on your projects, you spend money on my project. And they've got away with this for a long time, and we kept re-electing the same people to the Congress who's spending all this money. But guess what? Something happened in the last few years, especially about 5 years ago. It's been discovered that we're broke. And we're broke, and there's nothing there. And therefore, the arguments and the tenacity that they're fighting over this shrinking pie, a pie that's practically gone, is never ending. They can't solve the problem because all they're going to do is fight over it. They will not entertain the thought that maybe government is out of control. Maybe we need to rein in the government and allow the people to keep the fruits of their labor and not have to turn it over to the government. It's never been hard for me to come to that conclusion because I believe rights don't come from our government. Our rights come from us, either from a creator or in a natural way. So if we have our lives as a gift to us, and we have our liberties as a gift, why wouldn't it be natural to think that if it's our life and our own liberty, why shouldn't we be able to keep the fruits of our labor?
And the Fed!
Which means that if we weren't fighting all these wars and we didn't have the right-of-way entitlement system, guess what? We wouldn't have an income tax. We'd go back to the old days and repeal the 16th Amendment. We didn't have it, and obviously the founders did not give us the income tax. The income tax came in 1913, of course, along with another little system that they invented in 1913. And I know you have never heard of what I'm talking about. They came up with this Federal Reserve system. after we win the election, of course. We're going to celebrate 100 years of the Federal Reserve System by repealing the Federal Reserve Act. The very least that we have to do is get an audit of the Fed, find out what they're doing. You know, Congress spends a lot of money. They're up into the trillions, but most of the time it's just meager hundreds of billions. But the Fed is involved in many trillions of dollars. They were involved with churning $15 trillion in the bailout. Of course, it was to help the people, you know, help the people that were losing their mortgages, because they had this incentive to always make sure everybody had a free house and qualified for a mortgage. Of course, during that time, who was making all the money? Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and executives at big banks and Goldman Sachs. When the crisis hit, you know, those who were going to get hurt, they came screaming to the Republicans and the Democrats, and they said, hey, there's going to be a depression, there's going to be a depression, come and bail us out, we're too big to fail. And guess what? The Congress did, as well as the Federal Reserve. They bailed out those who made a lot of money during the financial time when there was a financial bubble. And guess what? Those programs were designed to help the people and help the middle class and help the poor. They lost their jobs and they lost their houses. So it doesn't work. And this is what people are starting to realize. Not only is the Treasury bare, but the entitlement system doesn't work, and spreading our goodness around the world doesn't work. So now we have a system that is destined to change. The big question before us is, what's it going to change to? Are we going to accept more authoritarianism and tyranny, or are we going to accept the cause of liberty and return those freedoms to the American people? It is the cause of liberty that we must address, and understanding where our liberty comes from is so important. The wonderful thing about liberty and the understanding of freedom is it will bring us together. The interventionist system, the big government, the bureaucratic system, the redistribution of wealth by the special interest, that divides us, especially when we run out of money. But if you think about what freedom is all about, it isn't judgmental. It doesn't come along and say, well, we want our freedoms because we want to impose on people certain things. We want our freedoms to allow people to have their own life and their own lifestyles and their own private practices. That's their business. Yeah. So everybody's going to have different desires on what they want from their personal freedom. So we don't have to decide how we're going to use it, as long as nobody is forced to accept other people's ideas. So therefore, we should come together because we endorse the concept of freedom and allow people to do what they want, as long as they don't hurt people, and allow people to pursue their endeavors. But these rules should apply to economic liberty as well. Some people will defend this, social liberty and civil libertarianism, but at the same time they think, well, but we can't allow that to happen in the free market, because in the free market somebody might get rich. Well, in the free market, if you get rich because you provided a great service for somebody and we as consumers bought the product and we weren't cheated, and the more we buy, the richer they get, that's not a problem. But what if they're rich because they get money from contracts from the government, and what if they get bailouts from the government? That's a different type of richness. So the freedom issue brings people together. Not only does it allow people to spend their money and run their lives as they so choose, it also means that you can't be coercive. You can't be coercive with your neighbors and your friends, and we shouldn't be coercive with our neighbors and friends around the world. It is the coercion, the force, the intimidation that say that we know what is best for everybody. But today, this is the way we operate. It's around the world. Domestically, we are telling people what to do with their lives, what to do with their money, and we're telling everybody around the world what they ought to be doing. And this has not worked out well for it. It has contributed to our bankruptcy and contributed to the problems that we face and all the conflicts we have. And it's going to get a lot worse unless we establish the basic principles of what this country is all about. And it is our freedoms to live our life as we so choose and to spend our money as we so choose. People will argue with us and say, oh, that's not any good because you're not a humanitarian. You have to care about your fellow man. And if you don't endorse the welfare state and socialism and welfarism, you don't care about your fellow man. But just look at the failure. Socialism, communism, welfarism is on our doorstep failing right now, and the housing programs didn't work. So it isn't humanitarian. Maybe they have good instincts, maybe they have good ideas, and maybe they want to help people. But if you want to study history and find out where the largest middle class has ever been and the wealthiest middle class, it's been in the United States of America because it had maximum amount of freedom, and the freer we are, the freer our country is, the more prosperity there is.
Restore the Bill of Rights! USA! USA! USA!
But what we have come to now, though, is the middle class is shrinking, and the middle class is much poorer, and we can't solve the problems by doing more of the same thing. We can't solve the problem of a crisis that came on by too much spending, too much borrowing, too many regulations, and too much taxes, and too much printing press money. And that's what we've been doing for 5 years, and the debt is exploding. The deficit is annual deficit is $1.3, $1.5 trillion. So we have the fiscal conservatives offer their budget. It's a wonderful solution to spending too much money. And when are they going to balance the budget? Oh, well, maybe in 30 years we can balance the budget. That's not going to work. I suggest what we should do after the next year's election, of course, is cut the budget by $1 trillion in 1 year. We'll start by stopping the wars and bringing our troops home and have them spend their money here at home. That doesn't mean only the Middle East. That means from Korea and Japan and Germany. Why should we subsidize their defense? We need to bring them home. We're flat out broke, and we have to borrow the money to do this. So this system is coming to an end. It's good news that it's coming to an end. It's risky business because we don't know what the replacement will be. But from my viewpoint of having traveled around the country, going to numerous campuses and talking to young people, let me tell you, I'm encouraged. I love what you people are thinking about. Dependency is never a way that you feel good about oneself. The more dependent you are on others, the less content people are. And that is what people have to realize, that if we would have more freedom and release the creative energy and put the burden on us to take care of ourselves, then we can work for our own virtue and our own excellence. This is what gives people personal satisfaction. It is not being taken care of by somebody else and eventually having that ripped away. We cannot depend on others to always provide. It's been wonderful to think about, you know, the Medicare system. Everybody should have good medical care, obviously, but is it going to be provided through the government? Just think, Medicare's broke. There's no money there, and the only way we can continue to even work our way out of this is we have to save a lot of money elsewhere. So my suggestion in cutting this $1 trillion is obviously to cut essentially everything from overseas and cut some departments that we don't need, and try to tide people over that we have taught to be so dependent on child health care and Social Security. But right now, what we're doing is we're still spending, running up the debt and printing the money, and now we're just seeing the beginning of the end of the dollar because the prices are starting to go up. You cannot keep printing money forever and think that the world will always accept the dollar. Right now, there are plans being laid for the replacement of the dollars. Other countries have suggested this should be done. and they have met their fate because Saddam Hussein wanted to replace the dollar. And also in Libya, Gaddafi wanted to replace the dollar. Right now, Iran would like to replace the dollar, and they get into trouble for this. But we're the ones that'll be in trouble because economic law will dictate to us that they will not always accept our dollars just by printing them. Right now, there is way too much trust in the dollar. Therefore, what we have to do is restore the understanding and restore the principle of sound money, and that is the reason we don't need a Federal Reserve, and we need commodity money such as gold and silver as the Constitution
No more
dictates.
fiat!
But someday we're going to have to reverse the trend. So far, the trend this year hasn't been the greatest. On January 1st, there were 40,000 new laws laid upon us. You might as well go to college and study how to read all those laws and what these laws say, because it's going to take you an eternity to understand them, because nobody does. Unless you get into trouble, then the bureaucrats and those authorities will come and tell us what's going wrong. But I would like to be the first president that got rid of 40,000 laws. That's what I would like to do. I would like to see the day where the Federal Register actually shrinks rather than it totally expands all the time, because it's just too difficult to keep that up. But I'd also like to restore the principles of a free society where, and it might not be important to everybody, but maybe a few people would care. I'd like to see the day when you actually have the freedom to drink raw milk if you want to. And take your own risk. Matter of fact, I'd just as soon see the day that you can put anything you want in your body that you want, and you take your own risk when you do it. You know, there's an interesting issue dealing with medical marijuana. But it's a great issue for me to want to bring left and right together. You know, the people from the right, you know, use the word states' rights, and that's a bad word. That's politically incorrect. They say that's not nice to say, you know, states' rights, and it means something else. But just think about it. If you had states' rights in California, you wouldn't have the feds bugging you and coming in here and invading and telling you what you can do with your own body. Then of course the danger of drugs are obvious to me as a parent and a grandparent and as a doctor, but I'm also very much aware of the fact that prescription drugs are deadly too, and there's probably more addiction to prescription drugs than there are to illegal drugs. But not only has the war on drugs been a total failure, it hasn't solved the problem at all. There is a drug problem, obviously. To deny that would be not a wise thing to do. But to say that the drug war has helped, the drug war has become much more dangerous to us. It's undermined our liberties. It's undermined the whole principles of the Fourth Amendment and privacy rights. So the drug war has been much more dangerous than the drugs themselves. Actually, if we could maintain the republic, we would actually allow you to pick and choose which light bulbs you would like to use and dictate exactly which one you have to use. So this is, these are the, you know, simple little things, but they're pretty important to make your own choices. And that is what freedom is all about, is making our own choices and not forcing anybody else to accept our choices. That is what we should be aiming for. And it is wonderful that we don't have to give up and say that we will be less prosperous. I've always said, if I had my choice of living in a free country and living in a poorer country, I want to live in a free country. But we don't have to make that decision. We opt for liberty. We're going to live in a richer country. There is no doubt about it. So therefore, the cause ought to be liberty. But you know what has happened is that we became so wealthy, and then our government started to grow incrementally, and then we started to redistribute wealth for good intentions, and it was fine when we were a wealthy country. But then eventually, the further along we got, the more it gave the incentives to the special interests, the big corporations and the lobbyists, and then that became a business in itself. And that is the way government is run, by power and lobbyists and money. And what have those individuals who are redistributing wealth forgotten? They forgot about the production of wealth. You can't just have redistribution of wealth when it's not being produced. We have to talk about how wealth is produced, and that is in a free society.
Yeah.
That's how wealth is produced.
Right.
They say that the problem in Washington is not enough compromise. I say there's been way too much compromise. They compromise on the issue, both parties compromise on the issue that you can't challenge the Federal Reserve. They compromise on the entitlement system. They compromise on the monetary system. They compromise and they go together and accept the same foreign policy. We elect one president, then we elect another president, and they say they're going to stop the wars and they're going to change. They never do. It's a one-party system, unfortunately. But the people get left out on this. This is why there are so many people now, more and more people are calling themselves independent. It's also a political problem for our campaign. It's very difficult, you know, to win a primary in the Republican Party when the Republican Party might be, the majority might want to have more war, and the people who don't want war are independents and Democrats. So what we need to do, though, are bring these people together, and under the present circumstances right now, if you want to promote that cause, you might seriously consider maybe getting involved in the Republican primary at least this year and see what we can do to change things in this country. But it isn't compromise that we want. You know, if you had compromise, how would you compromise, say, on going to war? You need a declaration of war, don't you? Oh, well, we'll let you go to war sometimes without a declaration. What is a compromise on monetary policy? Print the money slower instead of having sound money? I mean, how do you compromise on things like this? What about the new policy that the president has instituted? And that is, he's allowed to assassinate American citizens. I say there's no compromise on that. He's not allowed to assassinate anybody, and he shouldn't be allowed to do it. And he shouldn't be allowed to use the military to arrest suspects in this country and put them in prison without a trial. We need to look at the National Defense Authorization Act and remove that authority from the president. The Congress gave him that authority. He doesn't need it, doesn't deserve it. Reverse things and make sure that your privacy is protected. See, unfortunately, what's been going on for so many years is that the government gets more secrecy and the people have less privacy. And we need more openness in government, and we need more privacy for the people is what we need. But the direction that we have gone since 9/11 hasn't been favorable toward the cause of liberty. For instance, shortly after 9/11, they passed a little piece of legislation called the Patriot Act. Maybe if they had called the Patriot Act repeal the Fourth Amendment Act, it might not have passed. But when we get ready to get rid of the Patriot Act, which maybe that'll be during this first 6 months or so, we'll call the bill not repeal the Patriot Act. We're going to call it restore the Fourth Amendment Act. But what we need is coalition building. Because right now we've inherited a system where freedom has been chopped into pieces. Some people defend civil liberties and some people defend economic liberty. But if you believe in individual liberty, it's all one and the same. We need to bring the factions back together and put the pieces back together. But we have to emphasize the fact that liberty is individual, but not by groups. I don't like hyphenated rights. We don't have rights because we belong to a group. Tragically, this came about because in our early history, some groups were punished, you know, because they belonged to a certain group. But we should never punish anybody because they belong to a group, but we should never give special benefits to anybody when they belong to a special group either. But today, I think the worst discrimination that we have in our country today has to do with the enforcement of our drug laws, because because when you look at the number of poor minorities who happen to be in prison for life, using drugs that were nonviolent, and were nonviolent, it far outnumbers those who happen to be rich and of a different color. You know, it is very unjust, and there is discrimination in those fields. But we should think of liberty as being individual. Everybody should be treated as the individual. Everybody should have equal justice before the law, and we should diminish and decrease the amount of emphasis about us belonging to certain groups, because I think that is distractive to the cause of liberty. I think when you know that we're arriving at that stage on an election night, you will not hear the commentators come in, because I think they sort of feed into this. How did the blacks vote? How did the Hispanics vote? How did the white people vote? How did the Jewish people vote? How did the Catholics vote? How did the individuals vote? That's what we want to know. You know, in a free society, people will certainly do things and spend their money the way others might not approve. But as I explained, we shouldn't be telling them what to do, but they have to accept the consequences. But one of the reasons why people are intolerant is when people do things that they don't like, they think that if we legalize their choice, that we endorse what they do. And that isn't the case. If we legalize, which it is pretty good in this country, we legalize the choice in religion, or if somebody doesn't want to have any religion. But we are tolerant of that, and we accept that. But as soon as it comes with personal habits, we say, well, we legalize such and such activity, therefore we endorse it. But it isn't endorsement. It means, though, that as individuals in a free society, that we should become a lot more tolerant of other people and leave things alone, you know. Ideas have consequences, and bad ideas have bad consequences. Good ideas have good consequences. And it's fortunate today that good ideas are starting to prevail once again. Once again, we're talking about sound economic policies and personal liberties and putting the pieces back together. And there's a growing sentiment in this country today about changing our foreign policy. Believe me. When the wars were started and when I was fighting to try to stop the wars, it was difficult. But now we're up to over 70% of the American people who say they're sick and tired of the wars and we ought to get home from the Middle East and out of Afghanistan. This to me is encouraging, and but we have to keep, you know, fighting this ideological fight and this battle. It's a revolutionary idea to once again get back on the path of what we were started with. And it isn't like we're going back to the old days. They keep saying you want to go back to the past, but I think tyranny is the past. Freedom is the future, is what I say. Suggest that we take advice from the 1960s. Back in the 1960s, there was a lot of difficulty with the Vietnam War going on, a lot of drug problems and everything else that was going on. And they said in the 1960s, and it still hangs around a little bit, they said, if you're 20 years old and not a liberal, you don't have a heart. And then they said, if you're 40 and you're not a conservative, you don't have a brain. But I'll tell you what, why can't you have a heart and a brain at the same time? That is what we need, and that's what freedom is all about. It's far from a perfect society, but the imperfection of man means you don't want the government telling us what to do, because they don't know what we want to do with our lives, and they don't know what we want to do with our money. So when the government takes hold, they don't know what we want, and they make mistakes. When they do it, it affects all of us. But when we do it to ourselves, yes, there will be consequences, but you don't have a right to demand that your neighbor takes care of you because you've made mistakes and made bad choices. And that's something that has to be assumed. If you don't do that, then you'll have to say, well, the collective has to take care of everybody. Everybody owns everything, and everybody's going to take care of us, but that won't work. Self-reliance is very important in a free society, and it's a very productive incentive for people to take care of themselves, and this is where the wealth comes from. But there's every reason to expect that we can handle these problems. I think they're very, very serious. I think the financial crisis and the debt crisis is the biggest in all history. I've read a lot of economic history, but the debt bubble is huge, and it is based on the dollar. It's been around a long time, and it's more complex. We've been a more global economy than ever before, and so we have to deal with that. So we've had worse times in some ways, the Great Depression and world wars going on, but this is structural. This is structural for us with the understanding of freedom and the understanding of how serious our economic problems are. And this is the reason why we have to band together and fight for this cause. And I believe it's an idea whose time has come and it cannot be stopped. Worried about whether or not we have the majority vote in Congress yet. But you know, it isn't going to happen. It is an irate, tireless minority who's willing to start these brush fires of liberty in the minds of men, and that will change this world. And I believe that is what's happening today. That people are energized and they're enthusiastic about this, and these changes can come about. So there's many reasons for us to be optimistic, but not unconcerned. We should be concerned because other nations have gotten to this point and they went in the wrong direction and they ended up with more tyranny. But this idea that we're going back to the old days, freedom is a very young idea. Tyranny is the old idea. If they're talking about going backwards, they're going back to tyranny. That's big government telling people that they don't have individual rights, that they can arrest us by the army, put us in prison, no habeas corpus, assassinating our own citizens, fighting wars that are undeclared, the rule of law being ignored and the Constitution ignored. That is what is serious, and that is what we have to get hold of and change the direction of this country. But there's reason to believe that this momentum can continue and will continue. There's every reason that we should expect an improvement. I see it all the time. Now, when is it going to come back? Tomorrow, the next day, or whatever? People sometimes get annoyed now. No matter what happens, nothing ever changes. But it's people's attitudes that count. Just think about the bill, Stop Online Piracy Act. That horrible bill that we had. Just think the government wants to control our internet. What's going on here? But what happened? You woke up, you sent messages, there was a majority vote in the House and the Senate. They knew they had to vote. They were scheduled to be voted on. The people woke up and they told their members of Congress and they withdrew the bill, so they will listen when they hear from you. This is actually what happened when we got the audit on got the House at least to endorse auditing the Federal Reserve. People like you called your congressman. It wasn't because I had political clout in Washington. I can twist arms and I had power, but the power of the people and the power of ideas made these changes. But we need to know that things can be changed if the people's minds change. This is most important. The government we get, any government, is really a reflection of what the people will put up with. And right now, though, I sense the people are getting tired of putting up with what we have. Too many wars, too many attacks on our liberties, too much debt, too much mischief, too much benefits for the special interests, and too many bailouts. So this is a grand time for us to pick up and do the changes that are necessary. For this reason, I believe that very soon we're going to see that this momentum will pick up and that we will be able to, and we will see the restoration of freedom and prosperity and peace in this country once again. Thank you.